Hello Internet. Welcome to a room that is not my bedroom. Tonight we're going to be doing things a little bit differently, trying to switch it up a little bit, make it more interesting. I have a live studio audience. Say hello audience.
Hi!
And I am going to be telling you about James Prosek. Prosek is an artist who uses traditional scientific visual forms to create a critique of the scientific understanding of nature. He uses media atypical of contemporary arts like watercolor, as you see here, and taxidermy. He started drawing fish and fly fishing as a child, and through this he started becoming adept at scientific illustration, and he got obsessed with trout. And he sort of learned scientific illustration by himself. So he amassed all of these images of trout, and at the same time he realized that for some reason there isn't a cohesive book of trout in North America. Go figure. And he realized he had almost all of them, so he filled in the holes, and at age 19 he published Trout, an Illustrated History. Yes. And this was while he was a student at Yale, and after he published this, he switched from architecture to English to improve his writing. And it must have worked because 4 years later, by 2000, he had published 3 more books. So sometime after this, he decided to begin an art career. He had begun deviating from traditional scientific illustration pretty early on, but he didn't really see an outlet for it until at some point he was working on it and got a solo show at the Philadelphia Academy of Art in 2005. So these were all like this true-to-life renderings of animals, but not of species that could actually exist in our world. So this piece is called Pegasus. It's a common seahorse with the wings of a yellow-breasted chat. So it's still true-to-life renderings of animals, just kind of juxtaposed, but still with that same fidelity of scientific illustration as before. So, like the Pegasus and this turtle dove and parrotfish, a lot of these are kind of whimsical and childish, but a few of them really showed deeper thought, like this, which is called Hippocampus, and it's a seahorse curled in the hippocampus of a brain. But now hippocampus is also the name of the genus of seahorses, and also the name of a mythical underwater horse. So here Prosek is starting to tie together different scientific disciplines, but also tie them to myth and show that these aren't actually totally contradictory things, but they're just two perspectives on the world around us. So Prosek's idea is that taxonomy is too rigid of a structure and isn't really good at a good way to look at nature. He says that naming incarcerates creatures that would otherwise defy depiction. Classification, the popular pastime of the 18th century, implies dominion. You name, therefore you own. Or better yet, you destroy. So while he's coming up with these ideas, traditional taxonomy is also being turned on its head. Molecular phylogenists, who are people who study taxonomy on a molecular level, started realizing that species aren't as defined as they thought they were, and maybe instead of a super rigid tree like this, an animal's family tree might be more, I guess, curvilinear, and with slower splits, not all these like sudden changes from one species to another. And at the same time they were starting to understand speciation in a different way. They also discovered things like cryptic species. Like this little shearwater is actually a group of a bunch of different species that all look the same, act the same, eat the same food, and live in the same area. They just don't reproduce together. So there's no way to tell that they're different species unless you very, very heavily monitor their sex. So Prosek and artists like him are giving us alternative ways to look at nature to sort of solve this problem. And they can be absurd, but at least they're giving us some sort of alternative view, some way to kind of break out of the scientific mold. So like Mark Dion and other artists, Prosek is looking at the natural world through the lens of an earlier time. He's referencing this era when all of these species and specimens were coming to Europe from abroad, just like pieces of animals from everywhere, and the naturalists had to figure out how to put them together, what they were supposed to be, and they would create these strange amalgams, kind of like Prosek's work, which seems really antiquated, but it actually still happens today. This is a great auk at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, and it's actually pieced together from the skins of a bunch of other alcids, which are animals related to it, like puffins. So they try to make it true to life, but since we've never seen a great auk, we actually have no idea what it's supposed to look like. So we don't have anything to compare it with. And we only have people's descriptions, and believe me, people can be really bad at describing animals. I'm a birder, as many of you know, and people come to me with all sorts of strange ideas of what the animals they saw look like. And you know, like, not only do they have different ideas of what large might be, but different ideas of things like yellow or chest. So it's really difficult to find the truth in these reports. This is something Prosek takes on directly in his series called Suriname, which is based on when he went to Suriname as part of a scientific research team. The paintings are ones Prosek made in the field and in the studio. The field ones he rendered like he normally did, but when he worked in the studio, he distorted his paintings to reflect the subjectivity of his memory and his notes. So this also throws the other images into question, because they're drawn by the same person. They're either drawn fleetingly from life, or carefully from dead specimens, or from his memory again. And the idea is, if we can disbelieve these supposedly real specimens that we just believed not that long ago, maybe we can also believe his obviously fake ones. Now, Prosek's doing this differently than all those other artists, or many of the other artists, I should say, who have made these amalgam animals. Some of them are doing it just out of whimsy, but others, like Joan Font-Cuberta, he was trying to trick us. He presented this exhibition of photographs of made-up animals as if they were real, as if they were from somebody's records that he found. And a lot of people actually believed it. Whereas Prosek, his point is that his creations are unbelievable, that they exist outside of our understanding of nature, outside of our scientific frame of reference. For instance, we know that foxes can't have feathered wings because these species are so far apart that they would never be able to interbreed. But flying fox is rendered just as much detail and just as scientifically as his trout pictures. So in this series, he also started taking a new direction. Before, he had painted these invented animals and sometimes had taxidermied specimens with them. But now he's actually adding real wings to a real specimen, but still doing it with the same care and fidelity as his paintings. So this one is pretty obvious. Some of his creations are more subtle than the flying fox, but the titles always reveal their alterations. For instance, drill duck and cockatool. You wouldn't necessarily know exactly what was happening, but if you look closely, you can see that there's like Swiss Army knife stuff here. And the titles are a reference to traditional taxonomy again, because instead of having wonder and mystery in the pieces, the viewer can look at the title and immediately be like, oh, okay, I get it. This duck has a drill for a beak. So Prosek is protesting traditional taxonomy, but he also recognizes its need. He says that we need to use names to give shape to the natural world, and that if we have taxa that are unnamed, they can just be ignored, and they won't receive protection, and they might die out before we even understand why they're important. So a lot of Prosek's work in this vein focuses on animals that we both want to save and want to harvest, like eels and trout and foxes and ducks. So Prosek is an ardent fisherman and a specimen collector, but he's also an ardent environmentalist, so he embodies both sides of this dichotomy himself. So in this same tradition, he's started looking for his most recent work, ocean fishes, at pelagic game fish, and creating life-size paintings of them. This is a very small rendition of this swordfish. It's actually 12 feet long in real life, or the painting is in real life, as well as the swordfish. So he wanted to capture the colors of the living fish, because most people only see the fish when they're either dead or on video underwater, and when they're underwater or dead, they lose a lot of their color. So his early work was illustrations of species-typical fish. So that's when you have an illustration of a fish that represents its entire species. So you can actually identify any number of the species by this, but in this case, he's actually doing portraits of individual fish. So he painted them as he saw them, with whatever scars they had on their bodies, and whatever light and reflections that were coming off of them. And he even at times painted his own reflection in their eyes. So these are sort of, since they're individual portraits of fish that were caught on fishing boats, they're kind of elegies for these fish that have since become either dinner or cat food or whatever happens to the fish on commercial fishing boats. So Prosek's work doesn't really seem to fit in a contemporary art setting. Like, you couldn't necessarily see this in a gallery easily. And he's actually gotten more attention from other institutions. This series, Ocean Fishes, was first shown at the National Academy of Sciences and then at Drexel's Academy of Natural Sciences. He's had 8 solo shows, but only 2 of them have been in contemporary galleries, and the rest were in museums, scientific institutions, and educational institutions. His first show in a contemporary gallery was in 2011, and that's after he'd already gotten attention for 5 shows and 9 books. So it can be difficult to start off as an outsider like this, but Prosek has some definite advantages. He went to Yale, so he had all the connections that kind of come with that. And from that he became a curatorial affiliate at Yale's Peabody Museum of Natural History. And he had had his first 2 solo exhibitions at Yale, which gives him instant credibility. And also, connections with Yale gives him access to specimens and research expeditions, which are very difficult to get involved with if you aren't affiliated with an institution, as I found out recently. But he's moved beyond that. So he had this starting out, but since then he's definitely gotten a lot of recognitions. Among them, he's been in 2 exhibitions curated by Mark Dion, Voyage on Uncanny Seas and Oceanomania. So this recognition by Dion holds a lot of weight in science-themed art. Dion's kind of one of the heavy hitters, and both Prosek and Dion idealize and criticize 19th century science at the same time. And they also tie it to continued practices today. For instance, in Life and Death, a Visual Taxonomy, Prosek brings traditional scientific practice to the forefront. In the middle here are actual taxidermied animals, and around the outside are paintings of skins that he pairs with the taxidermied animals. Skins are not taxidermy. They hadn't been put in lifelike positions. They're just kind of stuffed and stuck in drawers for research later. And this references the use of dead birds as models for traditional scientific illustration by kind of like making it glaringly obvious. And he furthers this idea by painting the silhouettes from Peterson's Field Guide to Birds on the wall. This is, as far as bird things go, this is a pretty famous image. And he still numbers them, but he takes away the key, which takes them from ID tools and turns them into aesthetic objects. So another similar artist is Sana Kinisto. She constructs these scenes in light boxes, and they're based on the aesthetic of scientific documentation, and then she photographs them. She's selecting and elevating certain pieces of nature over others. So like Prosek, what she's doing is reflecting on how scientific inquiry influences how we look at nature and how we decide what is important and what isn't important. They also both reveal the act of creation in their work. In this Zona Antisystematica, Kinisto has pulled back from the stage to show the staging, to show her manipulating things and like what the environment is she's doing it. And similarly, Prosek in Kingfish, he normally will paint like plants and other animals in the corners here, but in this one he put a pencil. And the pencil's kind of turning it back on itself and referencing the act of creation as opposed to the thing itself, which scientific illustration normally does. And this revelation of the artist's hand is one of the main points of Prosek's work. He's taking this idea and turning it into a commentary on science by revealing the subjectivity of the supposedly truthful practice of scientific illustration. He's turning this process of studying, collecting, and naming into something that's much more arbitrary and creative. So this is leading us in a direction that seems to really not have any kinship with science at all, but I believe that it's actually paving the way for a more accurate understanding of the natural world in the future. Thank you.